Okay, next and final segment of the build is going to be Boom Sports landing gear, and I'm going to throw in the back end of this how I set up the tail servo and the gyro. I've done a whole full-blown JR770 gyro setup video series, so see that for setup, but I'll touch on how my range was and what ball position and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, on with the boom supports. Now, when you open the bag, I've already glued all mine, but when you open the bag, there were two rods that were the same length and one that was shorter. The shorter one, they're all the same diameter. The shorter one becomes our control rod. Put the metal rods in, so there's about 1 millimeter or 2 sticking out up where there's no thread. Okay, and by the way, you might want to take some alcohol, clean up the rod, and run it in and out of the carbon tube so you clean out any carbon dust that may be in there that may affect the epoxy sticking in the carbon. You don't want this pulling out in flight. Anyway, then what you want to do is, before you screw on the links, go ahead and put your guide on because it won't pass by the links. And then what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to screw these almost all the way on because our adjustment will be from moving the servo on the boom, all right? But what you do want to make sure is when you go to put the balls on is make sure that you have the MSH pointing out on the balls. So leave a little bit of adjustment room there so you can turn them. All right, so that gets that aside. Now on these, when you glue these up, I would take the ends of the end of the rod where the glue's going to go and how far it sticks into this end piece and sand the rods so that the glue sticks really well, and then clean them off with alcohol so you got a nice rough surface and clean. Now note the orientation. You want the holes to be the same angle to each other, but these pieces, one will angle up and one will angle down. This is so when you mount it onto the frame, its level points up toward the boom, and then when you mount the fin on here, it stays level too. If you've got one of these backwards, the screw's going to not work right. So make sure you build a set of those. And again, I use 20-minute epoxy. Let it set up enough. Made sure I worked the epoxy down. If you just put it on the carbon rod and slide this on, there's a good chance you just squeegee all the epoxy out here. So kind of work the epoxy in and out. Maybe put a little bit inside this piece as well before sliding the rod in. Okay, so that made those up. Next segment will come back. Actually, I'll just touch on the landing gear. In order to mount the boom supports, which we'll do first, we do need our landing gear because the boom supports mount with the frame and the landing gear. So I've kind of assembled half this. This is the way you want it with the curve up. These two arcs forward. Okay, now the way this works is you'll notice the bottom of the landing gear is flat, but it has these little lock dimples, okay? So what you have to do is you have to feed it in from the front first, and it'll snap in, okay? And then it's a little tough now. You got to push hard and get it to pass that first locking dimple in the landing gear because there's a tit sticking up inside here that locks it. Then you can slide it back and into the other two. This makes a pretty simple landing gear assembly. No screws or set screws or anything, and it looks pretty darn secure. So there we go. So get that built up. All right, so now we got our landing gear ready. Pretty straightforward, snap together. We got our boom supports. We're going to come back, mount the boom supports, the fin, and the control rod guide. Okay, first step is to mount the landing gear. Now, for the landing gear, let me get the heli here. For the landing gear here, you're going to need two 25 millimeters. The reason is those will go through the boom supports, through the frame of the heli, down into the landing gear, and a nylock nut. Up front, you're going to use 10 millimeters, so they're shorter. Now, this came as a tip from a guy on Heli Freak. He said if you go ahead and dig out some extra washers out of your kit and put a set of washers between the frame and the landing gear, as apparently that gives room for the canopy to fit underneath between the frame and the landing gear and kind of secure it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that tip. So I'm going to mount the front first, bolt through the frame. Okay, bear with here. Okay, then I'm going to put a washer on here, and then I'm going to mount the front landing gear. All right, when we come back, we'll do the back. Okay, so there we go, front on, and the washer idea works pretty good because it leaves a gap between the landing gear and the front, and it appears that the canopy will fit right underneath that gap. Let me double check here. I tried to actually fit it and give room for the canopy so it was described. Let's have a look here. Yeah, as you can see, it does kind of allow the canopy to fit there between the plate and the landing gear on these edges. So kind of interesting tip. I like it. Gives a little bit more breathing room. All right, so Needless to say, on the back we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put our bolt through. Now again, note the orientation of the angle of this. Okay, it's going to come through here. Of course, we got to feed a washer on there. Okay, and then by the way, something I didn't mention, but you probably will have noticed already. Get the hole lined up. Okay, these landing gear have nut holders molded into them. So what I do is I just start it, and once I get it started, what'll happen is, you'll need a wrench to turn it, or just pull the landing gear away until it seats in the nut holder and go ahead and tighten it up. Alright, so get those snugged but not tight, because we need to be able to move these around a little bit to line them up on the boom. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll continue on the back end of the heli with the fin. Okay, by the way, I misspoke on a previous segment. For the screw lengths here, I said it was 10 and 25. It's 10 and 16. The 25 millimeters are used for back here on the tail. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. You got your rod together with this on here. You got to have it that way. The rod won't go through here with the links on. Of course, you can put the control rod on later. Okay, so this goes underneath with the boom supports this way. Again, if you got these angles right, everything should look level. All right, and then this goes on next. And you go ahead, I'm sorry. These go underneath this guide. Sorry, not on top. Underneath, but again, the angle should be right. Okay, then this goes on top like so. Then you run your 25 millimeters through your fin, okay, and the nuts go on the bottom. So let's go ahead and get that together. I'll come back and review. Okay, so there we have it. Again, fin, bolt through this way, fin, spacer, the control rod guide, then the boom support, and then a nut, both sides. Snug them up, but make it so you can allow this to move. Then what you want to do is just eyeball across this and make sure it's parallel or level to the back of your frame here, and then go ahead and tighten them up one by, tighten a little, tighten a little, tighten a little, so it doesn't twist on you as you're tightening it. Tighten them up good. Be careful, it's plastic, but it shouldn't twist on the boom. Okay, by the way, just to say something real quick, if you followed the manual, they had you put this stuff on before you did your belt tension. So if you followed the steps in the manual, you want to keep these loose, okay, so that you can do your belt tension. If these are tight and you go to move your boom in and out, you're going to have a problem. If you followed the way I built in the video here, then you shouldn't have a problem. Your belt tension should already be done. You can go ahead and tighten these up. And of course, now you can go ahead and tighten these up the rest of the way. We left them loose so we could move our struts around to get on here. Alright, so my next segment will be basically setting up the tail servo. Again, I've done a complete JR 770 setup. So all that stuff will be identically the same. I'll come back and go ahead and talk about how I set, how much slider movement I had, and all that kind of thing, and where my settings are. Again, realize my tail servo is mounted on the other side, so it's maybe a little different if you follow the manual. But I'll talk about that when we get there. Anyway, that finishes up landing gear boom supports, and we'll come back and finish the build with the tail servo.